Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something called counterdancing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept.
It comes from Shintaro Miyazaki's 24-point list.
Yeah.
And the idea really is to explore how we can maybe, shift our relationship with technology.
Especially if you feel a bit lost, sort of caught between the digital world and, well, everything else.
Right. So our mission today is basically to unpack this counterdancing thing. What is it? Why should you care?
Well, Miyazaki starts by saying it's two things, really. It's an activity like a gathering of signals, different forces coming together.
Okay.
But it's also an idea, a way to think about decoupling and then relinking with the technosphere.
Decoupling and relinking, so not just switching off.
No, not exactly. He points out this feeling many of us have, this alienation, not just from nature, which we talk about a lot, but from technology itself.
Huh. Even though it's meant to connect us.
Right. And he asks, does just knowing about the problems with tech actually help us change things? Or does it just make us feel kind of depressed and stuck?
That's a heavy question. So counterdancing is like a...
They're going a therapeutic maneuver, yeah, against that feeling. But it's not about just saying no to tech. It's more like yes and no.
Okay, explain that a bit more. Yes and no.
It's about re-engaging, finding a different way to interact. Not outright rejection, but maybe reappropriation, adjusting how we relate to it socially and technically.
Finding our own rhythm, you said earlier.
Exactly. Finding your rhythm in this really tech-saturated world.
Okay, so it's active.
Yeah.
Makes me think of like hacking or using tech in ways it wasn't intended.
That's definitely part of it. Taking control. Miyazaki brings in this idea of code space.
Code space.
Yeah, from Kitchen and Dodge. Think about an airport check-in system. The software, the code, literally shapes how you move through that physical space.
Ah, right. The queues, the gates.
And how the space works or sometimes doesn't work depends entirely on that software. Code and space define each other.
Okay. So counterdancing in that context is about what? Changing the code, building different spaces.
Kind of both. It's about trying to create alternative code spaces. Ones that aren't just designed for efficiency or, profit.
So pushing back against the defaults.
Yeah, pushing back against the limits imposed by, say, big algorithms or extractive networks, trying to imagine and maybe build different kinds of digital and physical environments.
This sounds relevant to all the talk about smart cities.
Absolutely. Miyazaki wants to rethink architecting. Usually that's about designing systems, right?
Technical systems.
But he wants to infuse it with other values, make it communist, participatory, critical, even anti-capitalist, thinking about how we shape all our environments.
So it's about building better systems, but with different goals in mind.
Exactly. For well-being, not just the bottom line.
Now, you mentioned Miyazaki calls it dynamic and rhizomatic. That sounds complicated. Does that mean it's hard to pin down?
Well, yes and no. It means it's not supposed to be a fixed solution. It's an ongoing search, constantly questioning things like techno-utopianism or the idea of linear progress.
Because tech doesn't always solve problems.
Right.
Sometimes it just changes them.
Precisely. He references Derrida on that. And the rhizomatic part, that's from Deleuze and Guattari. Think of, like, a plant's root system.
Spreading out everywhere, no single trunk.
Kind of, yeah. It's about flat connections, linking ourselves, our joys, our desires with technology, but not in a rigid hierarchy. It's about assemblages, connections.
Okay, but he also warns about engaging with tech, the art of dosages.
Right, because the technosphere can be overwhelming, even toxic. So it's about finding a balance. How much do you connect? How do you connect? The goal isn't just to use tech differently, but maybe to change tech itself. Make it, as he puts it, queer, decolonial, non-patriarchal.
Make it less rigid, less controlling.
Ungraspable, even. Schizophrenic, in the philosophical sense of being open to multiple flows, not just one dominant logic.
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
How does Donna Haraway's cyborg idea fit into this picture?
Haraway's cyborg is useful because it breaks down those neat divides we make, like body tool, human machine, nature culture. So counterdancing seen through that lens is about constantly building and destroying, not just machines, but identities, categories, the ways we box things in.
And Foucault comes in here too, with critique.
Yeah, Foucault's idea of critique is about looking at the limits. How do our ways of talking, our technologies, our systems limit what we can think or do? And critique for Foucault involves experimenting, trying to go beyond those limits. Realizing that the way things are isn't the only way they can be, it opens up space for change.
So it's individual but also collective. You mentioned groups earlier.
Definitely collective. Countering things like mass surveillance or data extraction, that really needs group effort.
How does that look in practice?
Miyazaki talks about things like critical mapping, coding projects using sound, but not just for practical ends, as therapy, as expression,
Coding is expression, like art.
or composing, or even dancing, yeah, finding the creative potential. The idea is also about demystifying technology. If more people understand it,
They can challenge it more effectively.
exactly, create a critical mass, as he says. And importantly, doing it without creating new hierarchies, avoiding those top-down tree-like structures.
More like the rhizome again.
Yes, equal distribution of power. This also connects to tackling bias in algorithms, like in advertising networks or automated decisions that affect people's lives.
And exploring things like adversarial machine learning.
Yeah.
Ways to trick the systems.
Engaging with all of that, face recognition, voice analysis, automated decisions, understanding and intervening in those algorithmic ecosystems.
You also mentioned poetry earlier. Counterdancing is poetry.
Yeah, drawing on Franco Bifo Berardi, the poetry of movements and signals, it's about finding ways to empower ourselves, to bring more poetry, more meaning into this often quite functional technical world.
And this connects to rhythm.
Right.
Yeah.
First, Lefebvre's rhythm analysis, listening to the underlying rhythms of capitalism. Then Miyazaki coins algorithm analysis.
Algorithm analysis, focusing specifically on algorithms.
Yes, on the impacts of profit-driven algorithms in our everyday lives. And he stresses algorithm, the rhythmic aspect. It's not just about clock cycles in a machine.
It's about human rhythms, too. Biological, emotional.
Exactly. The carnal, physiological, affective dimensions that algorithms interact with and often disrupt.
Which leads to this striking image. The counterdancer as both poet and schizo.
Again, drawing on Berardi. The poet part is about revealing the infinite possibilities of meaning-making. The schizo part, in that philosophical sense, is about embracing multiple flows, collaborating with diverse people, coders, activists, artists, to break free from constraints.
Translate.
Like what Elizabeth Freeman calls chrononormativity, the way systems, especially algorithms now, impose tempos on our bodies and lives. Think about the gig economy, warehouse work.
Right, the relentless pace set by the system.
Exactly. Berardi says algorithms can suffocate our biorhythms, freeze the poetry, but errors, glitches, they can actually open up new meanings.
So counterdancing might involve embracing or even creating those glitches, those errors.
It's certainly about disrupting the smoothness, the predictability, countering the way algorithms tend to cluster us, categorize us, what Wendy Chen calls homophily, our tendency to stick with the similar.
So seeking difference.
Striving for difference, yeah. Getting out of algorithmic comfort zones to create new, maybe more livable patterns.
And this happens on different timescales.
Right. We perceive things on a human scale, a mesoscale, but technology operates much faster on microscales, and there are slower rhythms too, seasons, years, geological time.
So counterdancing has to operate across these.
Yes, below, beyond, and alongside our normal perception. Thinking about electromagnetic signals, software-defined radio, things we don't usually sense directly. Specific timed actions across these levels, that's what he calls agentsment, orchestrations.
Wow. Okay, and then there's chaosmosis.
Yeah.
Dancing with chaos.
Yeah, that's Berardi and Guattari again. It's about opening up ordered systems to chaotic flows, to cosmic rhythms, not pure destruction, but letting some wildness in.
Making rhizomes with the software.
To de-stiffen it, yeah.
Yeah.
Allow for that chaosmosis, but carefully remember the art of dosages. It's a fine line between productive chaos and just being captured or controlled by the system.
This is dense stuff. Finally, he connects it to Walter Benjamin, blasting over the continuum of history.
Right. Using Benjamin's materialist view of history, it's about disrupting the idea of history as the smooth, inevitable progression, often told by the victors.
Wow.
By looking at frozen moments, crystallized moments, from the perspective of the oppressed. Benjamin used the analogy of film, how it could shock you, break down reality, let you see things differently.
And the implication for today is?
That media activism, coding, simulation, data analysis can be used in a similar way. To dissect, critique, and maybe reconstruct, to work towards that idea of communist architecting we talked about.
And this also ties into education.
Definitely. Benjamin and also Kittler talked about how media technologies shape even how we teach and learn the printing press, the teacher's body. There are analogies to software and algorithms today.
So counterdancing is also a kind of teaching or learning.
Miyazaki draws inspiration from counter-pedagogy movements. Freinet using a printing press for collective creation, Meyer's idea of building as a collective process, Papert's vision for kids learning naturally with computers.
Okay.
So counterdancing becomes this rhizome-inspired counterpedagogy, learning from forgotten bits of history, learning from past movements like psychedelics, cyberdelics, while forging new paths.
Wow. Okay, so it's clear counterdancing isn't just one thing. It's not a simple how-to guide.
Not at all. It's an ongoing exploration, a way of thinking and acting, and this deep dive is really just scratching the surface.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about. So, for you listening, consider those invisible algorithms, the ones shaping your feed, your commute, maybe even your mood.
Yeah.
How could you start to notice them? And maybe, just maybe, how could you counterdance with them, even in small ways?
Finding ways to contribute to tech that feels more human, more equitable.
Because, as Miyazaki might say, the beat always needs to change.